Your brain is actively working against your bank account right now. And I'm not talking about willpower or discipline. I'm talking about actual psychological mechanisms hardwired into your neural pathways that make you choose poverty over prosperity without even realizing it. The problem isn't that you're lazy or unmotivated. The problem is that your brain evolved for survival in the savanna, not success in a capitalist economy. And until you understand the invisible mental traps you're walking into every single day, you're going to keep wondering why financial stability feels impossible.
I've spent years studying behavioral economics and cognitive psychology, and what I've learned will genuinely disturb you. There are specific psychological patterns that keep people stuck in financial struggle, and most of us are running these programs without ever questioning them. Let's decode the 10 psychological traps your brain loves so much that it's literally keeping you broke.
Here's the first mind trap destroying your finances. Your brain has a present bias so strong that it would rather have $5 today than $50 next month. This isn't a character flaw, it's neuroscience.
Studies from Stanford show that when you think about future rewards, your prefrontal cortex lights up. But when you think about immediate rewards, your limbic system, the ancient emotional part of your brain, goes absolutely wild. The limbic system is stronger. It always wins. This is why drive-thrus exist, why impulse purchases happen, why subscription services auto-renew. Companies aren't just selling you products. They're exploiting a cognitive vulnerability that's been in your DNA for 200,000 years. Your ancestors needed immediate calories to survive another day. They didn't need retirement planning. So your brain evolved to grab the berry bush right in front of you, not plant seeds for a harvest you might not live to see. The psychology here is brutal. Every time you choose the immediate option over the delayed one, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways to crave instant gratification even more. It's a feedback loop that gets stronger with repetition. Want to know what's terrifying? Researchers found that people who consistently delay gratification have measurably different brain structures than people who don't. The neural connections in their prefrontal cortex are literally thicker, stronger, more developed. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you prioritize right now over later on, you're not just losing money. You're training your brain to be worse at making good decisions tomorrow.
Let me hit you with some psychology that'll make you uncomfortable. Your brain doesn't actually care if you're doing well. It only cares if you're doing better than the people around you.
This is called social comparison theory, and it's why keeping up with your neighbors, coworkers, and Instagram feeds is literally bankrupting you emotionally and financially. Here's what happens in your brain. When you see someone with something you don't have, your anterior cingulate cortex fires up. That's the part of your brain associated with pain and social rejection. Seeing someone else succeed actually hurts you physically. So what does your brain do? It tries to eliminate that pain by making you pursue the same status symbols: the watch, the vacation, the aesthetic lifestyle. You're not buying things because you want them. You're buying things because your brain is trying to stop the psychological pain of feeling inferior. Psychologists call this relative deprivation. You might objectively have everything you need, but if your reference group has more, your brain perceives you as deprived. And that perception triggers real stress responses, real anxiety, real compulsive behavior. The data is wild. Studies show that people would rather earn $60,000 when everyone around them earns $50,000 than earn $70,000 when everyone around them earns $80,000. Your brain would literally prefer to have less money if it means you have more relative status. Think about how insane that is. You're not trying to maximize your actual well-being. You're trying to maximize your position in an imaginary social hierarchy that exists entirely in your perception. And here's where it gets darker. Social media has weaponized this bias. You're no longer comparing yourself to your neighbors. You're comparing yourself to carefully curated highlight reels of thousands of people, most of whom are faking it anyway. Your brain sees someone's vacation photo and interprets it as a threat to your social standing. Then it demands you take a vacation. You can't afford to neutralize that threat. This isn't conscious. This is automatic. This is your primitive social brain trying to survive in an environment it was never designed for.
This one's going to hurt because you've definitely fallen for it. Your brain has this bizarre inability to let go of things you've already invested in, even when continuing is objectively destroying you.
It's called the sunk cost fallacy. And it's why people stay in bad relationships, useless degrees, terrible jobs, and expensive commitments long after the logical move would be to walk away. Here's the psychology. When you invest time, money, or energy into something, your brain starts to confuse that investment with the value of the thing itself. The more you've put in, the more your brain insists it must be worth it, regardless of evidence. Researchers did a study where people who paid more for theater tickets were more likely to attend the show even if they didn't want to go. The people who got discounted tickets had no problem skipping. Same show, different psychology. Your brain is trying to avoid cognitive dissonance, the painful mental state of holding two contradictory beliefs. I'm smart and make good decisions versus I wasted money on something useless. So instead of admitting the mistake, your brain doubles down.
This is why people finish degrees they hate, stay in gym memberships they never use, keep paying for courses they never watch. The money's already gone, but your brain can't accept that it's gone for nothing, so it keeps throwing good money after bad just to avoid the psychological pain of admitting failure.
The neuroscience is fascinating. Your orbitofrontal cortex, the part of your brain that calculates value, actually changes its assessment of something based on how much you've already invested. It's literally rewriting reality to protect your ego. And companies know this. They know that once you've invested in their ecosystem, your brain will resist leaving even when cheaper, better alternatives exist. That's why onboarding processes are designed to make you invest time and effort upfront. They're hacking your sunk cost bias. Here's what's wild. The smarter you are, the more susceptible you might be to this trap, because smart people are better at constructing elaborate rationalizations for why their sunk costs aren't really sunk. They're strategic investments or learning experiences.
Your brain thinks it's protecting you, but it's actually paralyzing you. This is the overthinking trap, and it's destroying more financial opportunities than almost any other psychological pattern. Here's what happens. You did with an opportunity, an investment, a career move, a business idea, and instead of acting, your brain demands more information, more research, more certainty, more time to think.
Psychologist Barry Schwartz calls this the paradox of choice. When you have too many options and too much information, your decision-making ability actually decreases. Your brain gets overwhelmed, anxiety spikes, and you end up doing nothing. The neuroscience shows that when you're faced with complex decisions, your prefrontal cortex gets flooded with competing scenarios. Each scenario triggers its own emotional response. Your amygdala starts firing warning signals, and your brain, overwhelmed by this neural chaos, chooses the safest option, which is usually no action at all. This is why people spend years researching the perfect investment strategy, but never actually invest. Why they take course after course, but never start the business. Why they optimize their resume forever, but never apply for the better job. Your brain is confusing preparation with progress. And it does this because taking action involves risk, and risk triggers fear. And fear is uncomfortable. So your brain keeps you in the research phase indefinitely because research feels productive without requiring you to face actual consequences. Studies show that people who make decisions quickly with limited information often achieve better outcomes than people who deliberate extensively. Not because the decision was better, but because execution beats perfection every single time.
The really insidious part, your brain will reward you for overthinking. Every article you read, every video you watch, every plan you make, your brain releases a little hit of dopamine. You feel like you're making progress, but you're not. You're just stimulating the reward centers associated with learning while avoiding the discomfort of doing.
This creates a psychological trap where thinking about success feels better than actually pursuing it. Because thinking is safe. Thinking has no failure state. Thinking lets you maintain the fantasy of unlimited potential without ever testing it against reality.
This one's brutal because it's self-perpetuating. When your brain perceives scarcity, whether real or imagined, it actually makes you worse at managing the resources you do have. When you're worried about money, your brain dedicates so much processing power to that worry that you have less capacity for everything else.
Think about that. Being broke doesn't just mean you have less money. It means your brain functions worse, which makes it harder to stop being broke, which increases the scarcity, which makes your brain function even worse. It's a downward spiral coded into your neurology. Here's what happens psychologically. When resources feel scarce, your brain enters a hypervigilant state. Your attention narrows, you become hyper-focused on the immediate threat, which is usually running out of money. This is great if you're being chased by a predator. This is terrible if you're trying to build long-term wealth. The scarcity mindset makes you overvalue immediate survival at the expense of future prosperity. You can't think about investing because you're too busy thinking about bills. You can't plan strategically because you're stuck in tactical firefighting mode. And here's the really messed up part. The scarcity mindset doesn't just affect poor people. It affects anyone who perceives scarcity. You could be objectively wealthy, but if your brain believes resources are limited, you'll experience the same cognitive impairment, the same tunnel vision, the same poor decision-making.
Studies show that people experiencing scarcity make more impulsive decisions, worse financial choices, and have harder times delaying gratification. Not because they lack character, but because their cognitive bandwidth is literally being consumed by scarcity-related anxiety.
The psychological research is clear. Scarcity creates a mental mode that prioritizes short-term coping over long-term planning. Your brain is too busy surviving today to think about thriving tomorrow. And the tragic irony is that this survival mode is exactly what prevents you from escaping scarcity. Your brain desperately wants to believe you're in control of outcomes, even when you're objectively not. This cognitive bias drives some of the worst financial decisions humans make.
It's called the illusion of control, and it's why people buy lottery tickets, gamble in casinos, day trade stocks, and convince themselves they can time markets. Your brain sees patterns that don't exist and believes it can predict outcomes that are fundamentally random. Psychologist Ellen Langer ran studies showing that people bet more money on dice they rolled themselves than on dice someone else rolled. Logically, this makes zero sense. Practically, it reveals a deep psychological truth. Your brain confuses participation with influence. Here's what's happening neurologically. Your brain's pattern recognition systems are incredibly powerful. They evolved to find cause and effect relationships in the environment. See smoke? Expect fire. Hear rustling? Expect predator. This kept your ancestors alive. But in modern financial environments, this same system becomes a liability. Your brain sees 3 stocks go up and creates a narrative about why. It sees a pattern in price movements and believes it can predict the next one. It confuses correlation with causation and narrative with understanding.
The psychology gets darker when you factor in confirmation bias. Once your brain believes it has control, it starts filtering information to confirm that belief. You remember the times your predictions worked and forget the times they didn't. You attribute successes to skill and failures to bad luck.
Studies in behavioral finance show that traders who experience early success often develop an inflated sense of control, leading to increasingly risky behavior and eventual losses that wipe out all previous gains. Their brains literally learned the wrong lesson because the reward circuits fired during lucky wins. And companies exploit this bias relentlessly. They design experiences that give you the feeling of control, even when outcomes are predetermined. Interactive slot machines, trading platforms with real-time data, customizable investment portfolios, all of it engineered to trigger your illusion of control. The really devastating part is that this bias punishes learning. When you believe you're in control, failure feels like personal inadequacy rather than valuable feedback. So instead of adjusting your strategy, you double down, trying harder at an approach that was never going to work.
Here's a psychological trap that's invisible to most people. You're not buying things because you need them. You're buying things because they reinforce the story you tell yourself about who you are.
Social psychologists call this identity signaling, and it's one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior. Your brain is constantly asking, what kind of person am I? And then it makes choices that confirm that identity, even when those choices are financially destructive. The research here is fascinating. People who identify as environmentally conscious will pay premium prices for sustainable products even when those products are functionally identical to cheaper alternatives. They're not buying the product, they're buying confirmation of their identity. Same mechanism for people who identify as successful, sophisticated, adventurous, or any other self-concept. Your brain will drive you to purchase things that reinforce that identity because maintaining a consistent self-narrative feels psychologically essential. Here's what's happening in your neural architecture. Your sense of self is largely constructed in your medial prefrontal cortex. This part of your brain creates and maintains your personal narrative, and it's incredibly defensive about that narrative. Challenges to your identity trigger genuine psychological distress.
So when you identify as a certain type of person, your brain interprets purchases that align with that identity as investments in psychological coherence. You're not wasting money.
You're maintaining your sense of self, which to your brain is literally more important than your bank balance.
The manipulation here is profound. Marketing doesn't sell products anymore. It sells identities. Think different. Just do it. Because you're worth it. These aren't product features, these are identity claims, and when you buy the product, you're buying the identity. Studies show that people will spend significantly more on products that align with their self-concept than on functionally superior products that don't. Your brain values identity, confirmation, more than objective quality. And here's the trap. The more financially unstable you are, the more psychologically important these identity purchases become. Because if your external circumstances don't reflect the person you believe you are, your brain experiences cognitive dissonance. So it drives you to spend money. You don't have to resolve that dissonance. You're not buying coffee. You're buying, I'm the kind of person who appreciates quality. You're not buying clothes. You're buying, I'm the kind of person who has taste. Your brain is paying premium prices to maintain a fantasy version of yourself that exists only in your self-narrative.
Your brain is terrible at predicting the future, but it thinks it's excellent at it.
This overconfidence creates a systematic bias called the planning fallacy, and it's why your financial plans consistently fail to match reality.
Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky identified this pattern. When people estimate how long tasks will take or how much they'll cost, they're almost always optimistically wrong, not by a little, by massive, predictable margins. Here's the psychology. When your brain imagines the future, it constructs an idealized scenario. Everything goes according to plan. No unexpected obstacles, no human error, no random setbacks. Your brain is essentially simulating the best-case scenario and treating it as the expected outcome. This happens because of something called the inside view. You imagine yourself executing the plan, and from that inside perspective, you can't see all the external factors that will inevitably interfere. You're blind to your own blind spots. The neuroscience shows that when you plan for the future, different parts of your brain activate than when you evaluate past experiences. Your planning brain is optimistic and abstract. Your evaluating brain is realistic and concrete. They literally don't talk to each other well. This is why people consistently underestimate project timelines, budgets, and difficulty levels. Your brain is running simulations in idealized conditions that don't match the messy, chaotic reality of actual execution. And this has devastating financial consequences. You underestimate how long it'll take to change careers, so you run out of savings before the transition completes. You underestimate renovation costs, so you're trapped with a half-finished project and a drained bank account. You underestimate business expenses, so your startup fails before it even launches. Studies show that even when people are explicitly warned about the planning fallacy and shown statistical evidence of how wrong their estimates will be, they still make the same optimistic mistakes. Your brain genuinely cannot integrate that information into its planning process. The really insidious aspect is that failure doesn't teach you. When your plan fails, your brain attributes it to external factors rather than flawed planning. That was a one-time thing. We were unlucky. If only this one variable had been different. So you make the same error on the next plan and the next one after that.
This is one of the most powerful psychological forces in your brain, and it's making you poorer every single day. Your brain feels losses approximately twice as intensely as equivalent gains.
Kahneman and Tversky again. They demonstrated that losing $100 creates psychological pain that requires gaining about $200 to offset. Your brain isn't wired to maximize gains. It's wired to minimize losses. And those are not the same strategy. Here's what this means for your finances. Every decision gets filtered through an asymmetric emotional response. The pain of losing money overwhelms the pleasure of making money, so your brain pushes you toward ultra-conservative choices, even when those choices guarantee long-term poverty. The neuroscience is clear. When you face potential losses, your amygdala, your fear center, becomes hyperactive. When you face potential gains, your reward circuits activate, but more weakly. Biologically, your brain is set up to avoid loss more than pursue gain. This creates terrible financial behavior. People hold onto losing investments hoping to break even, rather than cutting losses and reallocating. They avoid necessary risks that have positive expected value because the possibility of loss looms too large emotionally.
The really brutal part is that loss aversion makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Companies frame prices as avoiding losses rather than achieving gains because they know your brain responds more strongly.
Don't miss out. Limited time only. Last chance. All targeting your loss aversion circuits.
Studies show that people will work harder to avoid losing $10 than to gain $10. They'll make worse strategic decisions if those decisions are framed as preventing losses versus achieving gains. The outcome is identical, but the psychology is completely different, and here's where it gets really destructive. Loss aversion interacts with the sunk cost fallacy to create a psychological trap. You've invested money, so walking away feels like accepting a loss. Your brain hates that, so it keeps investing more, turning a small loss into a catastrophic one, all while your loss aversion circuits are screaming at you not to give up. Your brain is trying to protect you, but its definition of protection is avoiding the emotional pain of acknowledged loss, not actually maximizing your financial outcomes. And that emotional protection is expensive.
Here's the final trap, and it's the most dangerous because it's invisible to the people experiencing it. Your brain has a systematic bias where low-competence individuals vastly overestimate their abilities, while high-competence individuals slightly underestimate theirs.
This is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's why people who know the least about finance are often the most confident in their financial decisions. Here's the psychology. Competence in any domain requires a certain level of knowledge, but recognizing your incompetence also requires that same level of knowledge. So when you're incompetent, you literally lack the tools to realize you're incompetent. Your brain fills knowledge gaps with confidence. It has to. Uncertainty is psychologically uncomfortable, so your brain generates certainty even when that certainty is completely unfounded. You don't know what you don't know, and your brain doesn't even know that you don't know it. The research shows this pattern across every field. Novice investors are more confident in their stock picks than experienced fund managers. People with basic understanding of economics are more certain about policy recommendations than actual economists. Your brain mistakes familiarity with expertise. Here's what happens neurologically. When you learn something new, you get an initial dopamine hit. Your brain interprets this as mastery. I understand this now. But you've only climbed the first foothill. You have no idea that the actual mountain of complexity exists behind it, and your brain has no framework for recognizing that gap.
Your brain has a systematic bias where low-competence individuals vastly overestimate their abilities while high-competence individuals slightly underestimate theirs.
The tragic irony is that as you gain actual expertise, you become more aware of complexity, more uncertain about outcomes, less confident in predictions. So the truly knowledgeable people are the ones expressing doubt, while the dangerous idiots are expressing certainty, and your brain rewards certainty. Uncertain people make you feel anxious. Confident people make you feel safe. So you're psychologically drawn to taking advice from people who are probably wrong, and you discount wisdom from people who are probably right. Studies show that overconfident individuals take bigger risks, ignore warning signs, and resist feedback. All behaviors that lead to spectacular financial failures. But their brains protect them from recognizing this pattern by attributing failures to external factors while claiming credit for any successes. The really devastating aspect is that the Dunning-Kruger effect is self-reinforcing. Your overconfidence leads to failure, but you don't interpret that failure as evidence of overconfidence. You interpret it as bad luck or unfair circumstances, so you maintain the same level of unwarranted confidence going into the next decision. So there they are, 10 psychological traps your brain is actively running right now, working against your financial well-being, because they evolved for a different environment, a different set of problems, a different world entirely. Your brain isn't broken. It's just optimized for survival in conditions that no longer exist. And every company, every marketing team, every financial product is explicitly designed to exploit these cognitive vulnerabilities. Understanding these traps doesn't make you immune to them. Your amygdala doesn't care that you read about loss aversion. Your limbic system doesn't care that you understand instant gratification bias. These are deep neural patterns, not surface-level thoughts you can simply override with willpower. But awareness is the first step. When you can recognize that your brain is running a program, you can at least question whether that program serves your actual goals or just your evolutionary programming. The people who build wealth aren't smarter than you. They're not more disciplined. They're just better at recognizing when their brain is lying to them. They've built systems, habits, and environments that compensate for their psychological vulnerabilities instead of pretending those vulnerabilities don't exist. Your brain is going to keep doing what it's wired to do. The question is whether you're going to let it run on autopilot or whether you're going to start making decisions that acknowledge your biology while working toward your actual objectives.
Because at the end of the day, financial success isn't about being rational. It's about being aware of the specific ways you're irrational and building safeguards around those patterns. Stop fighting your psychology, start working with it, and maybe, just maybe, you can trick your primitive brain into building the modern life you actually want.